States, Rhode Island General Law 42465A2B, a discussion and an action. Nicole Solis versus the Town of South Kingston, case number 124CB00310, Rhode Island General Law 42465A2C, a discussion and action on a West Kingston Elementary School investigation under Rhode Island General Law 42465A8. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to convene an executive session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That motion carries. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It is 7 p.m. for tonight's school committee meeting. I would like to open the meeting. With a roll call vote. Mr. Bradley Share,
Here.
Mr. James Restivo,
Here.
Ms. Carol Better,
Here.
Ms. Melissa Boyd,
Here.
Ms. Kate Massonanti, Ms. Michelle Busso,
Here.
and myself, Paula Whitford, here. Please join us for the pledge of allegiance to the flag.
To the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have a motion to seal the minutes of the executive session?
I'll make a motion to seal the minutes of executive session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
There was one vote taken in the executive session, and that was to approve a record of action. And the vote was unanimous. Next on the agenda is community comments. Do we have anybody here that would like to make a comment? Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Do you have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, that motion passes. Next item on the agenda is superintendent's report. I'll pass that over to Mr. Padiza.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone in the public and members of the committee. In terms of my report this week, I will try and be as direct as possible. Next slide, please. The overview of my report, I'll talk briefly about the opening of schools. We have the traditional personnel report. I do have a report on enrollment, of which I will make up the bulk of my report. I do have a very brief equity audit, and then I will be turning it over to Assistant Superintendent Seeger as we continue to try and make sure we have at least one item related to teaching and learning on every agenda item. Next slide, please. So Mr. Seeger will speak to professional development. Before we get into the personnel report regarding staffing, I'm pleased to say that we continue to make headway in some of the open positions. Again, I will reiterate, and I'm pleased to say that all students have certified and qualified individuals who need them. Most of the positions that we are facing in openings are either administrative or work outside or do not work directly with students. So very important at this time. And in most cases, we have been able to fill those vacancies temporarily through agencies. Currently, we are still without a special ed coordinator. We are without a one-to-one teaching assistant. We are without a 1.0 teaching assistant. We still, and I will be working with Mr. Mahoney regarding potentially revamping the job description and or posting for our assistant facilities director. We are looking for a long-term sub for a leave of a speech and language pathologist. And we still have not taken any action yet regarding the both, I believe it is both grant funded and locally funded, a 1.0 MTSS coordinator. Again, those positions for specifically the one-to-one TA and the one-to-one TA, because they work directly with students, we have brought in an agency for. So again, while we want to fill all of our positions, again, those who, the number of faculty and staff that work directly every single day and every moment with students, those not vacancies in those areas. The next one, in terms of the opening of schools, is busing. Mr. Mahoney will be here later for the discussion item on this. I would like to point out, and unfortunately, that South Kingstown Public Schools are not immune from the issues that are occurring around the state. Unfortunately, we are also not immune from some of the routes that the statewide busing for some of our students. That has happened where students have come to have had bus rides to school, and then we get an email 15 minutes later or 15 minutes before the close of school saying, yeah, we don't have a bus to pick you up, or the family gets that. And then we scramble, and to this point, we have been successful, obviously, in safely returning all of our students. But we definitely look forward to a resolution that statewide issue. Again, we will be talking about busing in the discussion items. I will say that, you know, there's an element there of things that are or were under our locus of control, and a lot of things that aren't. And that I will salute, although there were some issues and that we were ambitious and thought that we would hit certain timelines, that we are trying to be proactive. And in doing so, you know, we ran into some difficulties when we turned that over to other parties. In regards to technology, Mr. Snow and his team, the refresh of all of the devices as scheduled continues. At the middle school, they have fully turned, rather than going to a one-to-one model where students have their own individual laptop, there are enough laptops in every single classroom to make that classroom, should the teacher need it and should instruction or assessment demand it, that they are a one-to-one. From a teaching and learning aspect, well, from a teaching and learning aspect, to some extent, it takes away the pressure to always be on devices, to always be digital. And so it actually needs to be built, it needs to be purposeful, it needs to be built into routines. And those routines are being established. From a fiscal point, in many cases, when those laptops are not being used, they're not being transported, they're not being put into backpacks, they're not being just taken home for home's sake. So, you know, on the fiscal and wear and tear end, we're hoping to see some benefits. And so far, Principal McNeese has not had any issues or reported any issues with that. We also have all of the new computers and iPads distributed to the appropriate grade levels. In athletics, all our fall seasons are underway. I'd like to thank the town as well as Mr. Mahoney and Mr. Lynch for their coordination. The spraying, I believe, for Triple E and for insect-borne illnesses. They worked in coordination with Parks and Rec and with the town, and that spraying is complete, as well as the notification of abutters. Mr. Lynch also reports that we are still and will continue to be until we are not in a high zone implementing smart scheduling. What smart scheduling means is basically that the athletic contest, whether it be a practice, a game, what have you, ends 30 minutes prior to sunset. So right now, as we still are in some daylight and sunset, we're still making good headway. As he said last week to you, that does put some pressure on certain sports. I believe he highlighted JV soccer, in which he's still rescheduling. Obviously, that timeline gets extended, or the ability to make everything fit in that window becomes more difficult as sundown gets earlier and earlier. So we will keep you posted. However, based on the forecast, there is no frost in sight. So we foresee being in smart scheduling for the majority of this season. Last but not least, in the opening of schools, cell phones, the Yonder pouches and the cell phone policy has been in effect. Those pouches were distributed on the second day of school, and all principals report orderly and fantastic compliance and understanding and dialogue with students and families. There have been minimal disruptions as far as the principals have communicated to me. The number one outreach that I have received came in response to my email to the community after the tragedy at Appalachia High School in Georgia. After, really debriefing again with our security plans as well as first responders, emergency personnel, as far in the conversations that I've had and that I've researched, really the cell phones, as much as people would like to have the safety or in the security or the perceived safety that is there, that we can help our children in a crisis of that magnitude, ultimately, the ability for students to follow the instructions of those trained to keep them safe is of the utmost importance and trumps that of their cell phones. Overloading networks and making sure that first responders and the school and other personnel can reach the networks and can reach emergency responders is also supersedes the ability or the need for one cell phone, as well as then the last piece that they highlight is the spread of misinformation. And so hearing rumors. So if all of a sudden there is something where, a school goes into a shelter in place and then the phones are broken out and it is to a response of something happening outside of school, where then people start disseminating misinformation, we could have an inappropriate response to something that is not actually occurring. So it is for those three reasons, for the most part, that in terms of that, I would like to highlight for the community, as much as we, again, rely on cell phones and want that communication, and they can be helpful in some situations, the overarching advice of, again, misinformation, overloading networks, as well as our students being focused in on the adults who are there and are trained to keep them safe and following their instructions, supersedes that ability or that need to get in contact in that moment. Once that has been taken care of, once the authorities have neutralized whatever event is going on, we can then work on reestablishing one-to-one communication, both through existing channels and, if need be, personal cell phone connections. Before I move on to the next item of my report, I'll take any questions or comments regarding the opening of schools. Okay, seeing none, next slide, please. Here we have our traditional personnel action form. We do have some resignations, some of whom that I've highlighted on there, as well as some of the positions that you'll see in the appointments. Specifically there, we had 2.0, or we had two special educators that needed to be, we had some resignations in our preschool. And again, I'm pleased to report that the majority of those positions have been filled, and or we were able to consolidate classrooms based on certain numbers. So again, we wish everyone who's on leave the best, as well as those who have decided to take their talents elsewhere. Thank them for their service, as well as welcome on board those before you in the personnel report. Next slide, please. So here we get into the enrollment piece. Here is the traditional format, or the format that I've been reporting out. I will highlight, and I will both highlight and apologize in that the modus operandi of enrollment that I've been reporting on, I was under the impression that when we did enrollment, that we were simultaneously doing withdrawals. And what I was thinking, or what I had heard, was that I knew that we had the exit survey and that was controlled at the school level. And so with when secretaries were returning, I was thinking that, oh, okay, well, now we'll get just the withdrawal data in terms of why people are leaving. In reality, the enrollments are occurring at the district level and the withdrawals are happening at the school level. And so this summer, again, assuming that both enrollments and or withdrawals were happening at the district level, was reporting to you as if those enrollment numbers and those enrollment reports were which was what was in our student information system in real time. However, it was inaccurate because withdrawals were not accounted for. So again, my sincere apologies. I will just highlight for you that in this, just to give you an update, so Matunic total on this enrollment is 245. It was previously reported at 257. Peacedale, which is currently at 353, was last time reported at 362. West Kingston, currently at 315, is actually at 315. The Broad Rock Middle School, which is on this report accurately at 555, was reported at 567. And then the largest, because it's our largest school of South Kingstown High School, is currently at 691, not the 727 that was misreported the last time. So our current enrollment as of the running of this report on the 5th, the district stands at 2,220 students, not the 2,291 that was reported.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes, please.
So now that we're aware of the discrepancy between the reporting, the differences between the district enrollment versus the building withdrawal, is that going to be rectified going forward? As far as the district should always know, I would
Yep.
think,
Yep,
right?
absolutely. And I'll speak to that actually in my next slide. So what we will do is and actually we started with district department chairs yesterday, taking a retroactive look at the summer and talking about and discussing successes, challenges, areas for improvement. We will do that because enrollment is such an overarching. And I will say, although I am not pleased to report to you that the reports were inaccurate, I'm pleased to report that no actions were taken as a result of those enrollments. So we did not order additional materials. We did not open or close sections regarding those. So again, outside of the egg on my face, if you will, the repercussions for the system are negligible at this time. And so moving forward, what we will do, because now that we are school is in session, and because school is in session and normally withdrawals will take place and materials do need to be returned at this stage of the game, my thinking is at this time we'll keep withdrawals at the level and we will work on a summer process, either by which withdrawals and the record keeping must be taken care of during those periodic times when people do come in during the summer, and that will move to the top of the list, and or that we'll put a workflow in that as part of the withdrawal process, if it occurs during the summer, we'll put in a workflow that will allow us to take care of that with people who are employed 12 months. Next slide, please. So this might look familiar in that this was the comparison chart that was done, and it's kind of the overall components that we spoke to. And most of these, outside of the total number of students across the district that decline, that number, that's the main difference. And again, it is a big one, and I don't mean to demean it in any way or sweep it under the rug. However, again, most of the conclusions there still stand. And again, no action was taken. So our grade level cohorts, as you'll see in the next few slides, are still stable. So in terms of, our second grade, when they are in second grade and going to third grade, those numbers are staying stable. We still see major shifts away from elementary, but that is still being driven through the data that we see. And that's primarily driven through the large 5th grade class now entering the middle school. So what we would say is away from elementary and into secondary or middle. And then overall, that other piece that was not accounted for was when grade 8 students moved up to grade 9. We had a little over a 10% decrease, which in my former life was about what we accounted for people choosing to go to private schools or moving or going to different places. And that did occur. Lastly, although I highlighted originally the class of 2024 as being a very large one and then saying, oh, but that's okay because our eighth graders are there, they were a very large class, but now our new freshman class does not exceed that level of total students. So, and then the last piece for those, in terms of fiscal metrics for FY25, I would highlight that again, this decrease enrollment overall that I'm reporting today is not a surprise and is reflected in our current budget and the positions that I believe was over 14 positions that were different from this school year to last school year were accounted for. And so that end loss of 61, we are still appropriately staffed. And again, as I mentioned previously, our total enrollment now is at 2,220. Next slide, please. So for those of you working electronically, also asked for was a way to, I attempted to try and chart those cohorts, at least in terms of a color copy. For those of us who are working off of paper, my apologies, as our color copier decided to get rid of toner or not have enough toner to get through. So what we see here and what I was talking about the cohort resilience, if you will, is comparing the beginning of last school year in the first column, and then at the end of last school year, the total gain or loss across any grade level. And so if we were looking at Matunic Elementary kindergarten going from 28 to 31 last school year, you don't just read across the column and go, oh, well, now they're 34. No, and what we would do is you would then follow that color-coded cohort in the start of the 24-25 school year, you drop down one. So I've done that. We're trying to demonstrate that both with brackets and the color coding. And here you will see also the numbers that I spoke to previously. Next slide.
Excuse me, Michael, I just want to make a comment.
Please.
I think another takeaways on your enrollment data is that you have what was last year's graduating class,
191.
but your incoming kindergartners is only 138. So that has historically over the last few years been a big problem with our enrollment. We're graduating many more students than our incoming kindergarten. So I just want to point that out as well, that is an ongoing trend that we've been seeing.
Absolutely. Thank you. And said much more eloquently than when I brought it up. And wanted to highlight that in terms of that end of that graduating class. But yes, compared to the number of kindergartners, there's going to be a loss there based on the students entering the district period for the first time, or our youngest learners, as well as those who have graduated because they've fulfilled the competencies of the vision of the graduate. And so again, here is the appropriate report, or again, the report with the updated data that we have as of the 5th. I'm happy to take any other questions related to our enrollment or the year-to-year comparison. I will be sure once we validate the data that has been coming in through the exit surveys and that I can cross-reference those to our withdrawals and a reason, and making sure that we have a column that says reason not provided and that total N of withdrawals can be accounted for. Then I'll make sure that once I've validated that data to include that in future reports as requested. Next slide, please.
Can I just ask a question
Please.
before I move on from that one? Looks like from 8th grade to 9th grade, we lost 21 students, about 11% of the students, which has been typical for us to see a decrease there. But do you know if that's the trend? And it sounds like that's about what we predicted when we were budgeting. Has that trend been pretty steady, or do we know that over the years from that 8th to 9th grade shift? Or is that something we could see maybe in the future, how we're trending? Because I think it's an important number for partially we want our kids to stay in our school, but also it's costly if they're running CTE programs at a district.
Yep.
So understanding that's helpful. It also seems like we're gaining in all the other high school grades year to year, we're gaining a small number of students each year, which I think is also an important trend. I'm not sure if that's a trend either that we're seeing, but
Okay.
I think it's good to see that there are others who are choosing to either to come back or they've moved here. I'm not sure.
Absolutely. And I will, once I validate that piece in terms of we have those who have chosen to not continue in the district, but at the same time, we do have new enrollments from both outside the district and people moving in that again are reflected in the overall and will be, accounted for in the withdrawal when an enrollment report that I hope to report and be ready and have validated for the next meeting. The longitudinal analysis of that we'll put on the agenda, and I'll see what I can do with that historical piece. I'll have to go into RIDE data. And at the same time, that would be the only pieces that there is that X factor of unknown of. So for example, while it looks like 10%, that it may have been more, but then it's offset by new enrollments by folks moving in. So that year-to-year comparison, it's going to be multivariate. But certainly something we can do. Yes.
Curiosity. So we are seeing, a drop in students, not a very large one, but a drop in the number of our students going from elementary school to the middle school, and then a bigger drop from grade 8 to grade 9. Is it easily accessible to find out if other districts are encountering that a similar drop in enrollment? I'm talking percentage wise, from grade 8 to grade 9.
So I can tell you anecdotally that as a former high school principal, assistant principal of, 13 years, that was something that in my former life and former district that we expected. So Cole Middle School enrollment in 8th grade was always higher than 9th grade, because in terms of high school, it's at that point, we start getting the pressures both of private schools and charter schools for academic purposes, but we also get athletic purposes. And so there's generally, that is usually where we see the largest migration occur, going with either prep schools or private schools for different athletic purposes. So in most cases, so again, that's an assumption, that's what I've experienced, but it's also an assumption that is universal across
Okay.
all districts.
Yeah,
But
that's
it's usually
kind of what I thought. Ironically enough, one of my friends who sent all their kids to private school with the 9th grade indicated to me the other day that his friends with students in South Kingstown Public Schools got a much better education than their own children at a private school. I said, well, you didn't ask me what to do with your kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Unless there's anything else from. Good, thank you. And last but not least, before I get to Mr. Seeger, I did speak actually with both Mandy Bozarth and Dr. Stanley Rabinowitz actually today. So they are from West Ed. Sorry, it shouldn't be West Wind. It should be West Ed. My apologies. They are scheduled to be in district on Friday, the 20th. We've gone through a preliminary schedule. I've outreach to our school-based personnel and notified folks of who they would like to have introductions to, give an overview of their process, and make introductions. They will not be, at this time, I don't believe that we will have time to visit schools or to give a broader view of the community. But so we will be visiting and conducting those initial introductions and general overviews at central office on Friday, the 20th. They are currently still crafting their data agreement with their own counsel. And then once it's completed, it will be given to us and reviewed by our counsel and reported out to you. So there will be no data that is not already in the public domain as part of any aspect of Friday, the 20th. I know that Terry had reached out for folks' availability. If there are times that your availability has changed or can be changed, or certain times that work better for you, please let us know and we can try and schedule those individual interviews with school committee. We'll slate about a half hour on that date. So as the 20th approaches, if your schedule changed and you're no longer available, or your schedule has changed and you are available, please let us know and we will make sure to schedule 30 minutes for you individually to meet with both Ms. Bothart and Dr. Rabinowitz. And now it is my pleasure, unless there are any questions about the equity audit, I will turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Seeger to talk about the wonderful professional development that was crafted in collaboration with all of our employees and bargaining units. Mr. Seeger.
Wait for that presentation. But you do have a copy of the slide deck in your packets for hard copy purposes. Well, while we get that presentation queued up, I just wanted to say good evening. Yes, is that, how's our volume? All right. I'm leaning over a little bit. That's all right. All right, here I am. Sure. Okay, great. Well, good evening, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, honorable members of the school committee, Superintendent Pedraza, Mr. Hennius, and all guests here with us this evening. I am very excited to be here to talk about a personal favorite topic of mine, one of my personal favorites here, professional learning. Given that we are in the business of teaching and learning, it is always a pleasure to speak about the design of professional learning and in an organization, in a system, and then also walk through some of the incredible highlights of our PD Day, which was this past August 28th. And please feel free to interrupt me as needed with any questions as we go through the slide deck in the interest of time. Next slide, please. So once again, the purpose of this presentation is really to provide an overview around, the complexion of professional learning here in South Kingstown, and then talk about that, the design of the Professional Development Day in particular. Slide, please. Excellent. So many thanks to my predecessor, Mrs. Meyer, and the Professional Development Committee, which to go back in time a little bit, you might recall that through an MOA between the NEA South Kingstown and the school district, there was a formulation of the Professional Development Committee in last October. And that body had the charge of not only designing the PD Day, which we'll talk about a little bit further, but also to come up with a draft professional development plan for the district, which we'll talk a little bit about. Next slide, please. So the starting point for all of this work really is the draft professional learning program vision. So again, I would like to take credit for the work that you see here, but I am merely the mirror holding up, the reflection of the work done by the PD committee. But you can see in this vision here, there's a clear commitment to providing continuous development that's grounded in real instructional excellence and really driving at that last piece here, which is keeping the focus on those outcomes for the professionals involved and certainly for the students. So keeping that end goal in sight. Next slide, please. So the PD committee also formulated a series of guiding principles. And this is just an assortment of sampling rather of some of the guiding principles that the PD committee felt were they needed to be appearing as something out front, kind of stake in the ground. This is what we stand for as it relates to the design of our professional development. So just to talk about a couple of these here. So we know that anything that we are doing should be innovative, but grounded in current research and evidence related to best practices for adult learning that yield the highest impact as it relates to student outcomes. Second bullet here is around purposeful collaboration. We know the brain science behind how people learn will support that learning is a social activity. And so we certainly want to model what we expect from students. So building in that genuine collaboration between and amongst the professionals was something that the PD committee felt strongly as a guiding principle. And then moving to the third bullet here, providing staff with an opportunity to have their own voice in professional learning and to have, a certain, whenever possible, to provide choice and some self-direction, some real agency over your own learning, similar to what we're all able to do as individuals in the pursuit of our own professional learning and growth. And then ultimately, that fourth bullet here, thinking about that outcomes piece, fostering that student-centered, safe learning environment that supports academic and social emotional growth. So those are some of the key guiding principles that are certainly important to call attention to help to highlight the PD day when we get to that piece. And next slide, please. So in addition to the vision piece, the PD committee also felt that it was incredibly important to look at best practices related to professional learning and existing standards that help to define exactly what that looks like for high quality professional learning. So it just so happens that Rhode Island has a series of high quality professional learning standards that were published about 6 years ago. And that link is there for anyone who wants to go and check out that document for yourself. And just to begin, again, we see called out in the RIDE document here that high quality professional learning is an integral part of a comprehensive talent management system. So and that word sticks out to me there is, professional learning is one key piece of a system that helps to develop, support, grow, and retain educators throughout their careers in the pursuit of those desired outcomes. Next slide, please. So you might be asking, what are some of those standards? So this is the super simplified version. So starting with the systems pieces called out in those standards, things such as having those clear goals as it relates to professional learning. What do we want the students and the educators to have in terms of outcomes clearly defined for us? Planning, utilizing data. Mr. Pedraza spoke very briefly about some of the data sources that we look at as a learning organization, and that would include, the forthcoming audit, looking at other data sources like our state assessments, local assessments, survey works data, just to name a few. And the third bullet here, strategically resourced. and then finally evaluated to measure impact. And I want you to keep that bullet in mind when we get to our survey results in just a few slides. Next slide, please. Thank you. So drilling down a little bit further into the process. So into the weeds, what do the standards say high quality professional learning should include? So keyword, once again, promotes collaboration, being consistent with how people learn, and can be applied to their context. So this is incredibly meaningful when we think about the perceived value and the relevance of professional learning and how people feel about that. The ability to take what you are learning and transfer that outside of the 60-minute session into your practice is ultimately what high quality professional learning arguably must include. And then finally, the third bullet here, back to that evidence-based, the research piece around what does effective adult learning look like? And as you may have gleaned from some of the previous slides here, you know, how people learn, there's a universal element to that in terms of best practices that are good for all learners, whether adult or student. Next slide, please. So we have all of these different component parts, all working as part of a system. And so what does that look like at the granular level for us as a district? Putting it all together, we can talk about, in particular, the Professional Development Day from this past August. So this is a very quick summary here of the Professional Development Day structure as designed by the PD committee. So some really quick details around it. We had an opening keynote session, and we had a local Rhode Island author, Mark Colagiovanni, who authored a book called When Things Aren't Going Right, Go Left. So he kind of kicked off a morning session with some inspirational words and sent our faculty and staff off to engage in 4 different sessions with a break for lunch, each of those sessions being 60 minutes in length. And as you can see from the top 2 boxes here, there was a combination of legislatively driven required professional development sessions that included things like our Nathan Bruno and Jason Flatt Act training, our right to read training, safety care training for de-escalation strategies, and other professional development related to the implementation of high quality instructional materials, high quality curricula. So that was balanced out with choice-based sessions that were all based on faculty and staff from South Kingstown who had put forth proposals to the PD committee and who were ultimately approved to engage in offering one of these choice-based sessions. So depending on your role in the district, folks had as many as 4 different choice-based sessions, and due to some time constraints, and time being a finite resource, as little or as few as 1 session was choice-based. But we had an exciting offering for those choice sessions. I put a few in here. This is not meant to be a comprehensive list. It's just a brief snapshot of some of the different topics that were covered, including student engagement, AI, neurodiversity, CPR piece, academic language, and some social emotional learning based offerings. So it was a really robust agenda and robust choices offered. I was able to get to quite a few, not all of them, not as many as I had hoped. I think I joined some of the other respondents to the survey in, expressing, a want to be able to see each of those pieces. And I think we can move to the next slide. So this next slide is really thinking about those offerings here. It just so happens that there's a consistent and strong connection between what the PD committee and the facilitators had presented in terms of offerings. And then something that Mr. Pedraza and I had presented to all faculty and staff as part of the convocation. And we had these three overarching essentials related to, South Kingstown Public Schools as a learning organization. And that was the safe, engaged, and future focused piece. So I'm happy to report that there was a consistency between our messaging and then what the PD committee had ultimately put together as a plan. Right, next slide, please. And we can move right to the next one as well. Thank you. So the feedback, we had an N of approximately, I think at last check, we were at 190 respondents to a Google Forms survey that was sent to all faculty and staff following the last session. It was actually embedded in the last session, so folks had an opportunity to respond in real time while still on site. So there was a combination of the Likert scale and free responses to various questions. Those questions we actually decided to move forward with basing them on the annual teacher and staff survey questions. So we're able to look at that data and cross-reference that with similar questions or the same question that appeared in last spring's teacher and staff survey. And then thinking forward, we can link that to the survey coming up in spring 2025. So again, trying to string together some longitudinal data that has consistent lines of questioning, all in the aim of having a more robust and meaningful professional learning experience. For those of you who are interested, you can follow that link and head off into the demo of the teacher survey. So you can see a sampling of the questions. We didn't ask all of them, we just asked some very pointed ones related to professional learning. And next slide, please. So in a similar reporting format to SurveyWorks, which their metrics are, they use that Likert scale and they determine favorable responses depending on where your response fell on that 5-point scale. So in using the same approach for our survey, we saw that the perceived value of the professional learning activities from that 190 respondents yielded an 81% favorable response rate. So while not perfect, while not at what we would want, 100, 81% is certainly something to celebrate, but certainly not to jump too far ahead, but we certainly want to, look.
Test.
And you just burnt that one out, but all right, awesome. Let's trade. Perfect. Just sense the power of this survey, like, yes. All right, so moving to the next slide, please. If that comes back on in stereo here. So moving to the next question, which was around the relevance to the content taught. So again, looking at that, at those choices available, there was 79% response, favorable response rate to, how folks felt that it was relevant to what they taught, their own particular content area or specialty. And next slide, please. And then finally, one other piece of feedback to share with you was the 89% favorable response rate to the perceived impact on improving instructional practice. So that one definitely stood out to me in terms of when we think about practice, think about how professional learning should, inform your practice for the better, leading to those those better outcomes. That was wonderful to see, 89%. And moving to the next slide, please. So with that, there's a lot to celebrate, but there's also a few points that jumped out in terms of the free responses that I wanted to share with the committee as well. Next slide. So the suggestions and considerations piece. So first and foremost, as we touched upon earlier in this presentation, access and choices. So because we are working, within the parameters of one professional development day, and time being that finite, limited resource, there's only so much time for us to be able to engage in that required PD and then offer those robust, meaningful, choice-based sessions. So a lot of the feedback touched upon that piece, really saying, I wish I could have gone to this. I wish I had time to go to this. And so again, I'm encouraged by that. I think that what that tells me is that as a learning system, learning organization, that the South Kingstown Public Schools faculty and staff is eager, and they want more professional learning that's meaningful. They want to be able to pursue those pieces. But again, back to that time piece being limited. So the hope is that take that feedback and through the PD committee that will be meeting this fall for its first meeting of 24-25, really pouring over not only the quantitative responses, but also those anecdotal free responses to really get a clear picture around the wants and needs for professional learning and the things that are going well that we want to preserve moving forward. The other piece in here, as we mentioned, continuing to go back to the data. I think that we have public-facing data at our fingertips that helps to inform us. And then we have our forthcoming equity audit, which will further enhance our ability as a teaching and learning organization to really focus our attention in on where do we need professional learning the most. And then finally, one thing I wanted to touch upon was just the nexus between professional learning and our data and our collective work as it relates to our school improvement plans. In my initial review of the draft school improvement plans for each of the 5 schools, again, I'm strongly encouraged by the work reflected there. And in looking at the offerings that we had, very consistent in terms of aligning those school improvement plan goals and focus areas with our professional development opportunities. So I'm looking forward to being a part of the PD committee and continuing to engage in that work. And final slide, please. So again, I would be remiss if I did not once again close out and thank the members of the PD committee, the members of NEA South Kingstown, as well as the school committee for the MOA that allowed us the structure through which to engage in this professional development. And again, thanking the PD committee and finally thanking our presenters and facilitators who stepped up, who wanted to be a part of the professional learning, who wanted to engage in that and provide those opportunities for colleagues within the district. So again, a huge thank you to them. And with that, absent any questions, I will turn it back over to Mr. Pedraza to close out the superintendent's report. But
So actually, I just want to say thank you, and especially to the committee. I think that's a great improvement to have a committee that can help us with these offerings for professional development, but making sure they're absolutely what the district needs. So that's great. Thank you for all your work on that. But I do want to ask you a question. You don't have to answer it tonight because you've been here a nanosecond. But I've had extensive conversations with Bob and Alexis on the Right to Read Act, because when I first came into the district, first of all, language learning is near to my heart because I had a child with special needs around that area. So just so you put that out there. So the Right to Read Act is something that I care deeply about and had a lot of conversations, and we were behind 2 years ago, and we made a lot of progress in that area. And so I would just like more information on how we're doing with those legislative requirements. And Right to Read is only one of them, as you know, but I think it's important that we stay up to date with those requirements and also to showcase the work people have done to get us to where we are today, because a lot of good work has been done. So I in just the future, I would like to see that.
Absolutely, and I appreciate your remarks, and certainly I'm looking forward to the opportunity to coming back to the podium here and being able to report out some of those successes, and also, do some investigating for myself. Again, being, to your point, new here, I'm still learning a lot, but I'm definitely very curious and excited to return and report back out. Thank you.
I'm going to say that again because my mic was off. We're excited that you're here.
Thank you so much.
So I just had a question too, and I want to make sure I'm clear if I was following. So for most, is about half the time that you're spending on this day fulfilling state mandates, and about half is optional based on the choices of what the committee's offering.
And excellent question, and my apologies for not being clear on that piece. So it really varied by department and by the individual. So I think, the goal was to provide as much voice and choice as possible. There were some, like teacher assistants, for example, I think many were able to engage in 3 to 4 different choice-based sessions, whereas there were other departments that, for example, we had some guest presenters who came in who were delivering really focused PD related to high quality curriculum implementation. So that occupied 3 different sessions. So it's really, nose to the grindstone kind of work related to curriculum, only allowing, the one choice. So again, it varied, but I think, again, trying to balance out, that the required piece with the choice-based piece. It was a challenge, certainly, and that showed in the feedback. But spirit, I think, was there, of course.
I think it's just important for us to be cognizant of, because there will be times, maybe within policy or maybe from the results of this equity audit, where the committee might want to require PD in an area, and to know how much room we have for that. And at the same time, we have a committee that monitors state legislation that may include more state requirements. And it's another area where, because the state doesn't think about how much they've already required when they're adding more requirements. Am I right about that? So I think it's just something that we might want to pay attention to and comment on in those circumstances too, when we want. I think the idea of the committee is to provide choice and to allow people to follow their interests.
Thank you. I appreciate that point.
I'd also in terms of that point, or highlight the efforts of our principals on the orientation day. In most cases, after in the afternoon portion and their faculty meeting, if you will, making sure that that we're taking care of some of those Rhode Island general law requirements, making sure that those annual trainings are being done, with the hope of making sure that we allow people have opportunities for that choice and voice. But actually, that's why I put RIGL as my last bullet under professional development, because just like not everything that the state wants to do can be put into the health curriculum without taking everything out in terms of requiring professional development on lots of things. It's going to be something that we're going to need to that we'll take into account, both in terms of our professional development as well as foundational things such as our calendar. And so these will be ongoing.
Boyd.
Thank you. I will echo some of the statements of my fellow committee members, but first and foremost, there's a question and a comment in here. I want to thank you, Mr. Siegel, and our superintendent for sharing this with us tonight, as well as with the community. I think in my time sitting here, very often we get questions of what is the process, and we hear some comments that there have been challenges in the past of positive morale and ensuring that our educators get what they need. So this is very positive news. Having been part of the discussions to ensure that the partnership is more collaborative in this particular memo of understanding. So I'm thrilled to see the other side of it, that this is positive progress going forward. And also to inform others that there is a tremendous amount of content that you all need to cover in this particular day, as well as in orientation. So I think this gives some shed some light on that for the community of the amount of work that goes into a day like this. And in addition, my question relates to the sessions facilitated by our faculty and staff and guest presenters. And I think this is an answer with orientation crossover and something you can provide later. I'm curious, there have been a lot of changes with policy in the last year or updates, and when and where is that covered? So perhaps in one of your future combined reports, you can just share how did we manage to fit that in as well? Because I think folks are curious about that sometime, particularly from my committee. But I want to acknowledge you and all of the members of the committee. This is challenging work to make the choices and to engage our educators as well at a very, very busy time of the year. So thank you. And thank you for all who were involved in the process.
Thank you so much for those remarks. And again, I definitely am getting that full sense here of, just how grateful I think we all are as a community for how meaningful and impactful the Professional Learning Day was. And just to your point, I don't know, but I can certainly, dig and find out, just how that process works here, and then certainly report back at a later date. So you can trust that. So thank you.
So this is one day of professional development. I'm assuming, and we have it on our calendar, that there are other, it sounds like, oh, you have one day of professional development and that's all you get. So I would like to reassure that that is not the case. And also to ask the question of, is there, and I don't want to assume, because I know it's contractual and when it comes to schedules and days, how many days, our people spend in our district. Is there discussion, and maybe that's at the committee level, of having maybe more than one day? Because there's so many options and so many things that are required versus what teachers choose. Having it spread out a little bit more, so it's not just a crash course on one day.
That is an excellent point. And my understanding at this point in time is, in our current CBA, we have one professional development day that is per that MOA from last October. But in addition to that, as Mr. Pedraza had touched upon, there are scheduled times afforded by the contract for building-based work to continue. So I know in my emerging understanding of how those operations look and feel at each of the respective schools, I know Mr. Pedraza made an excellent point in terms of highlighting orientation day, which was really, that's our opportunity. We have everybody here. Let's engage in those other pieces at the building-based level. So we also have our faculty meeting time that is, occurring at each of the building levels to allow for professional collaboration and, hopefully with the spirit of being able to, when possible, provide opportunities that are consistent with, the vision and the framework and everything outlined here. And then, above and beyond that, we also have, again, to thank my predecessor once again, for engaging in the consolidated resource plan grants that have afforded us the opportunity to have those restricted monies and dollars that are allocated through Title II in particular, for us to be able to engage in some targeted professional development beyond the scope of that single day. So those, our coordinators have been hard at work getting that logistically planned. So we have opportunities for whole departments to go and engage in that work. So, professional learning right now, again, that time as that finite resource. We heard that in the feedback of people wanting more time, more opportunities, and as creative as we can get to be able to leverage the different structures around us, whether it's grants, whether it's our current CBA. We want to pursue those opportunities to ensure that people are getting what they need for, in terms of professional learning.
Thank you, Mr. Seeger. And also thank you to the people who served on this professional development committee. It's my recollection, and someone here can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first time that this committee has come into action. And it sounds to me like it was a rousing success. And unlike you, I liked the percentages. So, it from the brief view of what you showed us was made available to the teachers. I'm impressed. And I'm glad that our educators had the opportunity to take advantage of, in my opinion, I'll never stop learning, so I can always do something better. Do we have in the district, I know we're focusing on the right to read, professional development, and some other things, but do we have any new curricula that are either planning on being put in place this year or in the near future that our educators will need training on?
Excellent question. And the short answer is yes. So we are currently immersed in going with a full implementation of our Eureka Squared math curriculum at K-5. So my understanding is this is really the first full year of implementation for all grades K-5. So that would entail certainly, the need for continued support for the educators, who are deeply connected to that work and involved in that implementation. And then the other piece is, going back to that legislation around, high quality curriculum materials. There is the question related to, the science curriculum. So that is from my understanding and an ongoing conversation, that with a number of different factors with respect to the timeline of implementation for high quality curriculum in the area of science. My understanding is also that the scope of high quality curricula that are green rated by ed reports that are, high quality curricula is it's narrow in scope. So my understanding again is as a district, we are, waiting for some forthcoming guidance as it relates to science. So that is in terms of the curriculum legislation, those are the pieces that are the most critical that are part of that legislation, the ELA math and science.
Is the Eureka Squared the one out of the University of Chicago?
That is an excellent question. I do not have the answer, but I can
Sorry.
certainly research that for you.
The math teacher in me just appeared at the table. Just curious. Thank you, Mr. Seeger. And
Thank you.
thank you to the committee who worked on planning this day.
Thank you so much.
So I would just like to say thank you to you for your presentation. I would like to thank the committee, who are our educators as well. And I would like to offer up the opportunity if you might have something to say at the podium about your experience and how that can keep you engaged going forward. 3 seconds, 2 minutes. I thought I'd offer up the opportunity anyway, because I'll tell you, coming into that orientation, before you all went on to your duties for professional development that day, I was very, very engaged. by the, what? Well, no, I didn't see a keynote speaker. It was Mr. Gaza and, Mr. Seeger's approach to presenting, how the day was gonna go, and having speakers like myself. So, you know, we do have great educators, and making sure they have what they need is how the best, you know, why professional development is needed. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. And with that, I will bid farewell. Thank you. I'm turning this one off, so, all right.
And that will conclude my very short report. Next time, next. time.
Leave you next time. I'm going to make a motion to approve the superintendent's report.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Alright, that motion passes. Before we move on, there is absolutely nobody in here that wants to make a comment, right? Oh, you do? Come on up.
Lack of minutes, the school building committee. It's not the first time I brought it up. It's the first time I brought it up at the town council meeting. I'm not interested in filing complaints. It's been a problem for a long time. I was, however, very upset and disgusted that Ms. Massananti was thrown under the bus. And don't watch the meetings because you don't need to see that. And I think that this committee and this superintendent need to provide an administrative person to take the minutes, type up the minutes, and give the minutes to the board. Because I don't know any other committee in this town, maybe your school committee boards do this, you take your own minutes. There are no other important committees in this town that I know of, and I've been to a lot of the committees for many years and decades that take their own minutes and are expected to, I guess, type them up or to chase somebody in the school district to type them up. I'm asking you to assign someone, a person that will do this, who will be at the meetings, take the minutes, because last night I heard, well, you know, they have problems with people taking the minutes. And I remember watching some meetings when you were chosen chair, and then the next meeting, nobody wanted to be secretary. That's not right. And I think it's up to you. Kate is your board, your committee member. She's the only elected person on the committee. She does a great job. Are you still the only woman on the committee? Yeah, that bothers me too. I don't know why that is like that, but she needs support. The committee needs support. They're not going to get it out of the deputy town manager's office. Please, please assign somebody to this. Be at the meeting. Take them at the meeting. If you can't, someone can't leave the office, the superintendent goes to these meetings. You could probably bring someone from your office, take the minutes, or do what Lynn in planning does. She has to listen to all those meetings and write the minutes when she's not there. But this is the most important committee that we have right now. We want a successful new high school, $150 million. I think the school district can afford to support this committee and support their member completely. You might think you're the attorney. There's a lot of minutes missing. Didn't just start this year. It's been from the beginning. They're always behind. When I went to the first meeting I went to in person last December, there were so many months in behind. Boom, boy, here two from April, two from June. Can't happen. It can't happen because you tell us you're transparent. You know what happens? You lose trust. We don't need our building committee to have trust lost. This is a big deal. I would really ask you to, I don't know how you have to do it, put it on your committee, your agenda, vote on it, make the decision and get them help now to get all those things done and get them filed. Now, because I said it at a public meeting, again, I've known it for a long time. It's out there. All right. You know, there are people who will file a complaint just because they will. By the way, they have a right to. They absolutely have a right to, because there's one package of minutes for this year. Not good. The other thing is, if you could please not use that format that when you print it off, half of it's shaded, so it's black. You cannot read it. You don't need fancy minutes. I don't know what your minutes look like. A piece of white paper, stuff typed on it, print it out. That's all you need. You don't need a special form. But please, please, please do it. I'm really asking you to make a decision, do it, spend the money, take the person's time. Please, Mr. Superintendent, bring someone with you so this isn't happening, because there are people going to be looking for those. And you have to get engaged. You're engaging in different things. You need to be in compliance. So please do that. And that's all I have to say. I am wondering where you got that $125,000 for the geo well exploratory. I hope you're not going to do that a lot, because that is adding to the budget. It doesn't matter that you're going to save the money. You hope, God willing, that works out to be a savings. But I will tell you, I've done a lot of very large construction, large construction. There's always a reason it's going to be given for, you know what, we need this. Just stick to your budget. That's my comment on that. But can someone tell me where it came from? I looked at the budget today. I could not find that. Can they answer? Is
So
there
can
a
I-
rule? No, I knew at some point.
No,
there's-
but
they
Andrew,
can't
can I
answer
jump in
anything.
real quick? I don't want, because it's community comment, I'm not talking to you.
Okay.
But what I want to say is on our agenda, if you don't mind, I'm glad you're here, because on our agenda, we're going to touch on those, if you don't mind. I know those seats are not ideal.
What is with these seats? Please. Are these table seats?
They are tables, yes. But we are gonna, if you don't mind, we will address those things on our agenda in the next few moments.
Okay, it's the
That-
first meeting I've been
Sorry.
to in probably 20 years. I
I'm glad you're here.
probably
I just want to add,
stay.
not to you, but to the rest of the committee. We did talk about this in prior meetings. So if you want to go back and see the
don't.
discussions,
wanna
we
go
have
back.
had many discussions on those
No,
very
I do not
things.
want to go back ever and look at a meeting. I like to look at minutes. Okay, thank you.
And
So
and
what we'll do
further,
right now is we'll let Miss Roberta finish
So
whatever
that's it.
she has to say.
I'm not
and
going
we
to
can
stand
move
here
on
and
to the
tell you all
items
you're
on our
great. I
agenda.
already said that thank you for being here. I will mention this, that I didn't mean to, but when you're watching from home, it's not obvious that you're all staring at your screens. When you're sitting here, you're all staring at your screens, even when there's nothing to be staring at, making you wonder, what are you doing, looking at your screens? Because this gentleman was giving a great presentation.
Stations on our screens.
Was there more than what was up there?
No, it's the same thing. We
Right.
just
Mm.
can't see it.
You guys
Yeah.
weren't, you three weren't. You guys. Eyes up. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss
Yes.
Mulholland.
Oh, it creates a barrier. It just does. It's modern, but it creates a barrier. Thank you.
So
On the topic of school committee business, I would like to make a motion to move to the front of this section, the school project update, which is item D, and also E, the geothermal test well drilling and support services.
I'll second that motion.
Aye.
Aye.
That motion passes. We will be moving item D and E to A and B.
Perfect. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna start with the school building, the school project update. And like I said, I'm glad Ms. Mulholland, is here, because, one of there are a couple things that I wanted to discuss, and one of the topics actually was the meeting minutes. So I started my day at about 6:45 with a text from our town manager, about this topic. So I've had discussion with both our legal counsel, and we actually got some information from the town's legal counsel, and they coordinated together. So I'm gonna say one thing is that I take full responsibility as the chair of that committee for the lack of minutes. And I don't know what was said last night, don't really care to know what was said last night, but because I am the chair, I truly take full responsibility for that. I also did lay on the full committee the responsibility that, to your point, no one has stepped up. Mr. Mahoney has stepped up. He's been my right hand and my left hand, and I'm very appreciative of that. That said, the committee is, and Andrew, you can help me here if I'm misspeaking, the committee is advisory by nature. So technically speaking, when it comes to posting the minutes under the OMA, right, we're exempt, which we've discussed. However, we've also discussed, we want to be a transparent committee, and we have made the assurance that we're going to post the minutes. We've had our wonderful Terry working hard to get us those done. But again, technically not her responsibility. So we're working hard. We actually have now discussed with Mr. Spiegel here with Left Field to help us with our minutes and to make sure that they're captured from the past, that they're up to date, and that they're going forward, and that they will be posted and part of the new website that will be launched on this Friday. So going forward, that is our plan, and all day long, conversations were happening at all levels to make sure that we have this plan put together. So like I said, I'm glad you came tonight, because that was what I wanted to, that was the main topic that I wanted to share with this. Second to Mr. Spiegel actually coming up and giving a presentation to us as well. Then the other question about the $125 million, and I'm sorry, $125,000. My apologies. Sorry. Rewind. If our CFO doesn't mind coming up, he can explain better than I can, obviously.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So the $125,000 is sourced from our capital fund, which is a designated fund separate from the general operating fund. And it's from the fund balance. So basically all that means it's the retained earnings that are left over in that fund already. It's not new revenues coming from the town. It's just it's rollover retained earnings in our fund balance that we're using to finance this project. So that's what that is. So it's not an additional cost to the district's operating budget.
I believe we had also committed funds to the project.
Correct.
Not all those funds were
Correct.
expended in these. So this was a commitment we made in the previous fiscal year
Exactly.
to fund planning for the project before the vote happened. So the funds were needed to sort of kickstart and get us ahead. All those funds weren't expended. I think maybe half of them.
Less than half.
And these funds were already sort of committed to the project, just to a different aspect of the
But they were
project.
committed
I
for
mean,
architectural
No, no.
purposes.
Yeah,
not
that's what I
for the
said.
geothermal.
To the project, but to a
So-
different aspect of the project.
So it was, you're right, it didn't hit our operating budget, but it went to out of our fund balance, which we're still within policy, but not best practices.
Just to clarify,
So,
the capital fund balance, which was about just over $500,000. Not
right,
the
but
operating.
it's still,
fund
if we
balance.
didn't do that, we could have done other capital projects.
Of course, absolutely.
Right, so I mean, I agree that this was a good thing to do. I disagree with how it was funded. We can agree to disagree. But at the end of the day, the testing is going forward, and that's a good thing. But to Roberta's point, I think we do have a responsibility to be very judicial with with how we spend funds so I welcome this opportunity to explain it again, but everything's an opportunity cost. If we spend it over here, we can't do something else with it.
I'm just, Ms. Mulholland wants to speak again, and I'm just want to follow our procedure properly. Is it? Oh. Sorry. Sorry. Updates myself. I'm gonna pass off to Chris Spiegel from Left Field to do, excuse me, to do any other updates and or to discuss the geothermal test well drilling and support services, unless anybody else has any questions about what we just talked about first. That's all you, Chris.
Mic check. Okay. Not the right presentation. That one's not the one I sent you. That looks like one of Phil's from before. Still not live. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be back in front of school committee. I think everyone here knows me. I'm Chris Spiegel. I'm an executive, a project executive with Left Field Project Management. I am the day-to-day project manager as well for the South Kingstown project. This is the project that I manage personally out of our portfolio of work. Very happy. Want to congratulate you first on your appointments, Mr. Pedraza and Mr. Seeger. I've had the opportunity to work with them both before. They're consummate professionals, and really happy the district has them because that means I get to work with them again. So just want to give you guys, just wanted to say that on a personal note. Sorry. Okay. No one, it's off the record then. It's a, and Andrew, you're just the best legal counsel too. So, so today, introduction, I guess I just did it. We'll talk about the RIDE process again, just to refresh everyone's memory about where we currently are and where we're going. Talk about the ongoing planning work, some community engagement opportunities, and then RTA for geothermal. The RTA for environmental engineering went to the town, but I'm still happy to discuss that as well, what that procurement was. So next slide, please, sir. So where have we been? So we're looking today at the RIDE process, stage 1. Again, identify need that was submitted to RIDE. It was approved. Again, that is where we collect data on your facilities. Stage 2, we're all familiar with the stage 2. That's what we went through most of last year. That's when we have a preliminary design, cost estimating for the project. And then the third item on there is approvals and beyond. Now, generally that should take just a short amount of time, but here in South Kingstown, we made sure that that took a little bit longer. and that was to get the right budget number for our project. It ultimately ended with voter approval of this project, which allowed us to go into stage 3 of the project. Next slide. So stage 3, if stage 1 is identify the need, stage 2 is develop a solution, stage 3 is design that solution. So there are 3 checkpoints during the RIDE process at the stage 3 level. The first is a schematic design review. The second is a design development review. And the third is a construction document review. Each of these 3 gates, as I like to call them, with the Rhode Island Department of Education has different requirements. And we'll get into some of those specific requirements when we start submitting the schematic designs for your approval. But suffice it to say, before I get into what these actually kind of look like, at the end of each one of these gates, we have to come to you as part of our process for approval of the design prior to submitting it to the Rhode Island Department of Education. Next slide, please. So this is the detail of the schematic design process. At each one of these, it is a checkpoint, as I mentioned, is a gate in our design that we have to pass through. We need approvals, not just from the school committee, but we also need approvals from the town council as the funding authority for this project. We also need approval from RIDE. Some of the individual things that might be included in the schematic design review are environmental engineering testing, phase 1 and phase 2. That's the environmental engineering thing that was on the agenda a little bit later. We have to meet with the Governor's Commission on Disabilities. We have to meet with authorities having jurisdiction, AHJs. Those can be police, fire, zoning, different state entities, the Department of Environmental Management. There's a lot of groups that need to sign up on this property. There's a lot of people that we are accountable to for the success of this project, not just you as the school committee, the school building committee, or the town council. As I mentioned, we will have a public approval by the school committee and town council, but we will also have a public presentation of this work. We're looking at these public presentations as an opportunity to get feedback, and I'll talk about the stakeholder engagement loop in just a second. At each one of these checkpoints, we also have independent and internal cost estimation. This is critically important. If you remember, when we first went into the stage 2, we only had 1 round of cost estimating that was performed by a third party to the architect. Well, left field came in with our independent cost estimating. Some assumptions were clarified, some scope was reviewed, and we ultimately came back to the town council and said it's a $150 million project, not a $125 million project. So this project that will have both independent and internal cost estimation, and those cost estimates will be reconciled, and that will give us our budget as we move forward into each successive stage. We're also talking about scope and budget alignment. As Roberta said before she left, we have $150 million for this project, not 151 million, $150 million for this project. We need to make sure that our scope aligns with our budget. Current comps that we're seeing on Johnston High School, Newport High School, leads us to believe that we performed our risk management analysis appropriately and that we have plenty of contingency on the back end of this project to cover any unknowns. With that being said, we never, and I'll talk about this in a contingency in a second. There's an important reason that we have contingency at this stage of a project, and I'll go into that in just a second. Before I do that, I know I've spoken quickly. You guys have had a long night. I don't blame Mr. Seeger, but it was a long night. Is there any specific questions you guys would have for me at this stage of the process? Any quick questions about the stage 3? I know I've gone through it quickly, but just again to summarize, it is a checkpoint in the design process. It is a RIDE mandated checkpoint. It is a series of approvals, not just from legislative bodies or from bureaucratic organizations such as the School Building Authority, but also from the public and from us internally.
Could you just tell us what the time, put that in a time frame?
Sure. So we have the schedule coming up. Actually, it's the next slide. So in terms of where we are in terms of the schedule on this project, we're looking at the schematic design period ending on 9/30. Design development period starting October 1st, going through January. And then the construction documentation period starting on February 3rd and going through June 30th. It is important to note that just because that we are in the construction document period, that we're still proceeding with work. These are what we call early packages, and you'll notice there are some early packages down here in the schedule, a little bit lower. So in order to keep the project on schedule, We will release certain portions of the work, which just means that we design some of the earlier parts of the work first, or we order materials that maybe have long lead times ahead of the project. We're actually looking at starting the enabling work in our current schedule for this project, actually in April. So that'd be when we would request control over the majority of the site from the school department, working with Brian, working with Mr. Lynch, working with the school building committee, and actually starting to get this project in the ground, starting ahead of the actual end of the school year. We can talk about logistics and how we make a project safe, but suffice it to say, there is a clear separation between our work and without giving away too much of the design because it's not finalized yet at SD. We are not going to be closing down any physical part of the school building prior to the project. So the school will remain, all parts of the school, with the exception of the fields, will remain in operation during the duration if the current schematic design that we have is advanced. So school remains in session. We have a 20-foot separation right now at the closest part. I know that sounds close. I've done projects with 8 feet separation. So we have a great construction manager, Gil Bain, on board, great safety team. We'll manage that well. In terms of some of the early packages, we're looking at structural steel. We're going to be looking at site work, demolition potentially of Curtis Corner Middle School, depending on what our SD estimates come back. We might release that work early as well. We haven't figured out exactly when we would like to do the athletic complex. It's still up for discussion, but that could be tacked on at the end of the project, as you see here, or that could be put middle of the project. We're still working on those exact dates. The end of schematic design, as we move into design development, will give us a lot of feedback on when we can start that work. Other things that we'd like to order early, generators.
I just want to ask you, is there a reason you can't do the Curtis Corner Fields first? Why is it either in the middle or the end, but not that you ruled out first for a reason?
Oh, we could start on it first. Yeah, actually, that's been discussed. I just didn't actually mention. I think it's much more likely it'll probably be done in the middle of the project as opposed to the end or at the beginning of the project. But it has a separate budget from the high school, as you remember. We separated that budget out in order to manage it very closely. But some decisions are going to have to be made, especially when we talk about geothermal. We can't have everything we want. We're going to have to make some compromises along the way, and geothermal is an aspect of that we'll need to talk about as we get moving. We haven't even done a geothermal test well yet. We are way out in front of our skis specifically on looking at that kind of thing. And we haven't even fully developed our site plan yet. All we've seen so far is the floor plan of the building, basically at this point. No problem. So having said that, next slide, please. I want to update you guys on some of the work that's been ongoing over the summer. As you can see, we have spent a lot of time with your educators and your administrators going through every single little aspect of this building and what they want in their project. On next slide, please. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. As you can see, what we're doing is we're collecting data and we're taking a look at how the stage 3 design is changing from the stage 2.
So it's very difficult for us to see. So I'm just curious. I don't want you to read the whole slide, but to give an idea of what that benchmarking exercise might be. that
So
we're looking
sure.
at.
So what we're doing is we're taking a look at space that we've devoted in your school to things like athletics or to media centers or to classroom space, lab space, and we're comparing it across the board to different high schools that have recently been built. And this is an idea of trying to see where we're up, where we're down, what we're doing differently. It's for us as the OPM, it allows us to kind of maintain the scope alignment. Really, my job in a lot of cases is to say no, unfortunately, in order for us to maintain our budget. This gives me an idea a little bit of where we might be adding maybe extra bells and whistles that are a contingency item to be talked about later. But it also lets the design kind of stay on track as well. So this is one example. Yeah.
Can we get this to the superintendent to put up on board docs so that we can go back and look at it in more detail?
Sure. Yeah, I can send it literally as soon as I sit down.
Great, thank you.
There's a much larger version of this too, if you guys want the full report. This is just 4 slides of it. It's a much longer report. Okay, longer, bigger one. Bigger is better. Gotcha. The next slide, please. So this is another way that we take a look at this data. So we take a look at what was programmed as part of stage 2 and where we currently are at stage 3 after another round of meetings. You'll see in red areas, these are spaces that have grown a little bit. The green areas are spaces that have shrunk a little bit. And these continue to be refined as we move along. Essentially, right now, we're at 154,000 square feet. We'd like it to be around 145,000 square feet. So this give or take is going to keep moving forward. Now, we can have 154,000 square foot building, depending on where costs in, or we might have to pull some things back. It's one of the, as we move forward, the design will get further refined, the numbers will get closer, and again, we'll have less assumptions. So this is another way that we take a look at about where things are going. Next slide, please. This is just a further detail of that. You can see, you know, in the stage 2, we had 200 square feet for the principal's office. Now we have 180 square feet for every single room in the entire building. We have that. Next slide, please. And what this allows us to do, and this is going to be even tougher to see, but it allows us to create what we call chiclets. So just like the tiny little, does anybody remember the gum? Okay. Just like that tiny little gum, we basically create every single space that we need to have in the building, and we create a rectangle, a square, which shows that it's square footage. And as we slowly design the building, we put all of these squares together because this tells us exactly how much space we need. And it's like putting together a bit of a puzzle. Now, you're not going to have 1,000 square offices inside your school. It's going to be dynamic. It's going to keep changing. But at this point in the project where we currently are, it's about budget and it's about scope. I need to make sure that you guys have the right scope and that you guys are on budget. As we move forward through other checkpoints, things will get further refined. And that's where we go into this next slide, which is this community engagement process. So as I mentioned, we're looking at SD in November, DD in March, and CDs in June, where we'll be going to the SBC, the school committee, the town council, and having a public presentation on where we are with the design. At each opportunity, it is a chance for us to solicit feedback and to pivot within our design process to see what is of most important, where are our numbers coming in, where do we need to pull back, where do we have maybe more money that we can spend. There's additional opportunities as well. We're going to be performing pre-construction surveys. That is when we actually perform house inspections of people's properties that live close to the project so that we make sure that our work doesn't impact their foundational structures or things like that. We also have a butters meetings, which is where we'll go into the neighborhood and we'll speak with residents about their concerns about the project. Of course, I mentioned the AHJ, the authorities having jurisdiction, public meetings. You're going to see one from the Department of Environmental Management shortly. If you live in South Kingstown near this school, you will get a note in your mailbox, a mailer describing it. We'll also have a community construction kickoff meeting. This is different for a lot of projects. My favorite way of doing it is to actually have a little block party where you get to meet all the people that are working on the project, the superintendent, my project manager who's going to sit in the job trailer all day, all of these people so that you put names to faces, you get phone numbers, and of course, special meetings. And you can always email us at skschoolproject@gmail.com. Again, that is skschoolproject@gmail.com. I also mentioned we have an updated website going live Friday. It's a lot more user-friendly. We think it's prettier. I did not design it this time, so a professional did. So much to my chagrin, that's the one that we have all chosen to move forward with. And as we move forward into construction and the design gets more and more refined, we'll start to put design things that you can comment on up there. We'll have more frequently asked questions will be devoted to construction or devoted to the DEM process or whatever it may be. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Any questions on the community engagement process or the planning process that has gone on over the summer? And I know it was hard to read, so I apologize. No? Okay, great. I want to talk to you for a second about contingency. You might remember that when we first proposed a $150 million budget, the project did have a substantial contingency. And the reason for that is lessons learned, not just by me, but from other project managers and other projects right here in Rhode Island. My mother said to me that you don't have time to learn from the mistakes yourself, so learn from other people's. Us holding this amount of contingency on a project, roughly about 8% right now, is to safeguard against unknowns that no matter how much planning work we do, we are going to run into unknowns. It is construction. We are going to run into hazardous materials that we did not think we did. We are going to run into soil. We're going to run into ledge, believe it or not, here in South Kingstown. There's a lot of unknowns on a project. So the contingency is at its largest at the beginning of the project where we currently are. So I am holding the most cash in reserves now. And as we move forward through the design, I will slowly release contingency back into the project. But more importantly, as we get past a lot of these unknowns, so once I get steel up, that's a great time for me to add things back into the project. So as I mentioned, unused contingency is used to add additional scope back into the project. So I might be taking things out, but as we release money back into the project, we can add things back in. And that's important that we identify scope that is easily added back into the project. These would be things like finishes. You know, as an example, probably the current design, schematic design, is probably going to have epoxy poured floors in the bathroom. It is going to have tile at half height, tile full white on wet walls, which means that's where the toilets are, where your hands are. If we have money at the end of the project, you, as the school building committee, might make a decision to, you know what, I really want full tile at all the walls, and I want full tile in our hallways. Those are the kind of things that are easy for me to add back into the project. What's not easy for me to add back into the project is a classroom, because now my steel has been set. Now I can't just add pieces of steel onto the back end of a building. So it's important that I get your scope first, and then we can talk about finishes and things like that later on in the project.
So, and that sounds great to release contingency funds back to the project. But my question is on process. So who gets to determine if those contingency funds are used to expand the scope, or used maybe to not cost as much for the whole project? Is that this committee? Is that the school building committee? Is that the town council? Is that your discretion? I'm just wondering about the process.
So I don't think so. I will say this, there is no formal process in Rhode Island for doing exactly what you just said. It is different in every single community. It is my job, though, however, to make sure that you are informed, whoever this process is, to make those decisions while you still have the ability to do it. If the prerogative of this project is we want to spend $149,999,999.99, that is what we do. But if the prerogative is something different coming down the line, that is a choice above my pay grade for you to do. But I will provide you the information with enough time that you can make those decisions as a group.
It's a great question, and it's something that we need. It's something that we need to determine. We're in agreement with our town officials, because that's a great question, because we don't want someone to usurp what maybe might be best for the school. But we also want to make sure we're doing what's best by the town and the funds. So that is something I think we need to explore at the school and maybe town level.
Yeah. So I mean, it's your one shot at a project this big. That's my personal. I would
Yeah.
much rather you do what I did in Smithfield, which is I returned $9,000 back to them at the end of the project, than what they did in my hometown was they gave back $7 million, and it was sidewalks, didn't have granite curbs. You know, there's lots of little things that at the end of the project.
And maybe this is a joint meeting with us and the town council to decide this process. I think this is worth talking about in the beginning. And so you have clear direction so that we, just think about it up front.
So I have
And I love that you brought that to us right now.
so I have been actually tasked with proposing some processes for not just this, but also for change orders, for invoice review, right? I can't come to the town council every time I need to have an invoice approved. It would slow down the entire project. So I have been tasked by the school building committee to come up with some processes, looking at what has been done in other communities that has worked well. Again, lessons learned from other places. And Those will be vetted at school building committee, and I'm sure whatever the process is to approve those, probably a joint meeting that'll happen. We're a couple months away, I think, from that discussion, but it's good to make sure it's at the forefront of my memory. And then why am I doing this? So again, some scope cannot be added back into the project, right? Physical spaces, we talked about classrooms. I also can't go back and redo your MEP systems, right? If you want air conditioning into the project, I need to know now. I don't need to know. I can't do it. I can't just add air conditioning back into the project. It's not as simple as me flipping a switch on a transformer or something. Literally, it has to do with code, your duct sizes. Like it's super complicated. Just everywhere but her room. So that's, I wanted to have this contingency discussion now. I know it's incredibly early, but when you guys see a budget, you're going to say, Chris, you're holding $15 million aside. Why are you doing that? And it's because of situations that have happened in nearby communities just over the bridge or in Cranston, where they've gotten to the ground. They weren't as protective of their contingency at this part in the project, and they had to go back out and ask for more money. And I know that is not an option inside
Chris,
Kingstown.
Do I remember correctly that there was an escalation budget, and that's separate from the contingency?
So the escalation contingency, now that we're moving into hard costs or my design budget, that's gotten shifted into my hard cost budget. There's still an owner's contingency on the project. That's roughly about 5%. And then there's also a construction contingency, which is held by Gilbane Building Company. That is within their contract. Essentially, it's about a 2.5% contingency that they use with our written permission that they can add things back into the project. But in terms of like change orders and stuff, like I can't just unilaterally, or the school building committee for that matter, can't just unilaterally approve a change order. So like as an example, if we said, you know what, Chris, we want to have outdoor basketball courts, they're not in the current design. That's a change order, probably about $250,000 change order. I'm not just going to be able to sign off on that. I believe that you will have a process in place where change orders over, and this is my recommendation, change orders over a certain amount of money need approval by whoever that authority is having approval. But there's also, I don't want to have to also come for a $5,000 change order. I don't want to be going, because it's going to delay the project. And every month that we delay costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Again, why I'm trying to get us in April, and Brian and Terry have been super cool about trying to figure out, and Chip, of course, have been super cool about trying to figure out a way that we can get in there. With that being said, I know I've gone over a lot of information. Are there any additional questions before we move on to the geothermal test well?
I just want to say thank you. And again, thank you for bringing this early so that we can begin these conversations in a timely manner. I appreciate that.
Okay. Paula, can I just go into it?
That was from the that was from the
Sorry,
school
Chair.
project update, but then we're moving into the next item for the discussion action. This will require a vote from us for the geothermal test well
That is
building
correct.
support services. Can we get his presentation first and then make a motion? Okay, that was a yes from legal.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. Okay. So I'm happy to be bringing the first recommendation to award of this project. We are officially going to break ground on this project. It's super exciting. I am personally invested in this project's success, so it's an exciting day for me. So I'd like to just go over what a recommendation to award process is. So first of all, a scope of work is developed by the design team with input from the owner, as well as myself and our construction manager, Gilbane. So a typical example of a scope of work could be a steel package or a concrete foundations package or a tile package or a carpentry package. There's lots of different types of packages, but we develop that scope of work. And then Gilbane bids that scope of work out to firms capable of performing that work that they have pre-qualified. This is where the transparency part of this process comes in. I then review those proposals with Gilbane and along with the design team, and we take an RTA to you in this case, or to the town in the other case, or whoever this process might be, to you to actually approve that subcontractor who's going to be performing the work. So we have descoping meetings prior to this. We bring the contractors on because we're looking for holes in their pricing. We don't want to get into this project and then them say, well, we didn't carry that. So we take a look at the pricing and we sit down with them, and my colleague T, who you guys probably know from school committee meetings, he goes through it. He's a former construction manager. He goes through it on a line by line basis and makes sure that they're carrying. And Mark Moore, who lives in town, he's leading this effort from Gilbane's half. They go through it line by line to make sure they're both carrying it. We then make a recommendation for your approval. And as you can see, this process becomes transparent and it does its job, because look how close these prices are. 97,755 and 96,173. That is the result of this construction manager delivery method, where it's transparent and we put it before you. So in terms of how this process played out, they bid it out publicly. We had 3 bidders respond in a timely fashion with bids. Allied Drilling LLC with a base bid of 83,320. La Framboise Well Drilling with a base bid of 81,800. And Phoenix Foundation Company, who had a base bid of $195,000. So in a general contractor project, I would not see any of these bids. The general contractor would go out and get them. They would make their price based on these bids. In your CM process, I see all of these. So based on the evaluation of bids that we received, it is the recommendation of both Gilbane Building Company and Left Field Project Management that a subcontract for this work be given to Allied Drilling LLC. The reason for this is that while Allied Drilling is a little bit higher in cost on their base bid, they have the materials and availability to start this work immediately. The other firm has a lead time. They have a backlog of work somewhat. They wouldn't be able to start as quickly as we want. This geothermal decision is a critical decision for the project. It will cost millions of dollars. We need to know as soon as we can about the geothermal. In our opinion, the delta of when we add in all the other factors here, which I'll get into in a second, is, well, you will way more make up than $1,000 difference in terms of time is money, and we're gaining a lot of time. So what does the full price include? It does include the trade costs. So as you can see, La Framboise was 81, Allied was 83. It also includes insurance. Sorry. It also includes insurance. Permit fees were excluded from this, but we believe permit fees will be excluded because it doesn't make sense for the town to charge you permit fees and then you pay interest on permits for 30 years. General conditions, which was bid out as part of your construction manager procurement, is included. The bond has been excluded from the scope. We also have additional insurance at $965, and then the construction manager's fee for overhead and profit at 1.75%. Finally, the total with all of these additional costs included, you're looking at a total of $97,755 for Allied Drilling and $96,173 for La Framboise Well Drilling. Again, we believe that the $1,500 extra to award to Allied Drilling in terms of being able to get the project in the ground sooner, it's more than a return on your investment for that. So it is Left Field's recommendation and Gilbane Building Company's recommendation to proceed with Allied Drilling LLC for the geothermal test well on the site. Before I request a vote on that, I do have an additional slide. Thank you. So this is a proposed area of where anywhere in this red square box is where we're going to be putting our geothermal test well. It is really not much different than if someone was to drill a water well. It's not, these aren't large pieces of equipment. We're looking to put a temporary fence around it with a gate. We're looking at, we've identified construction paths of travel. Again, we're going to be having an abutters meeting prior to this work taking place. We're going to meet with the abutters. We're trying to get that the exact location of the geothermal test well as centered on the site as possible. Just to make sure that we're not causing any issues, anything like that. There's going to be water as part of this site. So we've got a drain path that's been located here. We're going to be working with Terry about scheduling practices around it or moving practices as needed. Again, safety, top priority. So we're looking at a very tall fence to keep as many people out as possible. And if possible, I'll talk to Brian about maybe we can point a camera in that direction as well, just as another level of security. So having said that, again, my proposed motion for this group is to recommendation to award for Allied Drilling LLC in the total in the amount of 83,000 base bid, the base bid of 83,320, but a total cost of $97,755 to the project.
Before we have that motion, 2 points that I'd like to kind of maybe reiterate. What I really liked about this process and the way that Left Field and ultimately Gilbane went about it was, as he stated, it started out at, what'd you say, 83,000? And we had between Terrence and T and Mark, they were able to discuss so that there wouldn't be like, oh yeah, by the way, we need to add on this. Oh yeah, by the way, we need to add on that after the award happened. It all happened before. And so we have everything we need to know about what's going to take place and what the final number is going to be.
So those numbers that I showed you, the 83,000, the 195,000 that was way out in left field, those are the numbers after we have all these descoping meetings. When those numbers first came in, they were 65,000, 110,000, right? Because people carry different assumptions about what was going to be performed by them, what was going to be performed by Gilbane, what would be performed by the architect. So we have these meetings to get, and that's how you see the numbers get so close. I don't know what the 195,000, I have no idea. Maybe they're really busy. They don't want the work, but I mean, that price is just way out in left field.
But so can I also, if you could clarify for me, so I believe, and this is more about concerns about the abutters,
Mhm.
how long it will take, and in relationship, and we discussed a little bit about sound, because we want to be super thoughtful about the folks that live in the area. And so we have, of course, the fences, and myself and Kathy from SLAM, we remembered way back into the day when we were a little bit younger, and the little girl who fell in the well. So we wanted to make sure that we were like, had all the security possible, so that can't happen. But also more kind of realistically is when it comes to sound, there was discussion about the low sound generators, but what is the time frame for when the drilling starts and then
So
potential noise
exact
starts?
date, we're still away from, but probably won't be about 3 weeks at the earliest is when
No,
we'll.
but I mean, as far as how long would that?
So the actual drilling of the well will take a day. Well, actually, but we'll have to run that through a generator. We'll have to run water through it for as a test for about at least 48 hours. I can get you the better, but it's the sound of a generator. It's not the sound of drilling. And again, we're lucky that we actually have a lot of room on this site. We've got a lot of opportunity where we can place this so that we can minimize the amount of noise. So of course, that's the typical kind of why we're doing this.
Yep, and my understanding, and I believe Mark from Gilbane said that as far as decibel sound, it was like 80, it was well below what would be.
Yeah, it wouldn't
Concern.
qualify as a noise violation by your town charter. But let's get all of the facts, and I'll have it at the abutters meeting, and I will make sure that you know all of those facts as I'm presenting them.
So just a quick question. So when you put the fence up, all of the equipment that's being used, everything will be contained within that fence. There will be nothing
Mhm.
outside of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just
Yeah, we don't want someone pulling a power plug on us and have to do it for 3 more days.
you are next to a high school. So a question about the well itself. So I think if the findings are positive about
Mhm.
the ability to have, that well stays there. Am I right about that and becomes part of the system?
It would
That-
become part of your system. Right now, it's currently going underneath, if it's at the top of that box, it's actually going to be in a green space, where the design currently is. If it's further down, it'll be in a parking lot, under a parking lot.
And so that somehow that security around that well has to remain throughout. And
Yeah, they'll have a plug in it. Yeah.
and if we find we can't use the system, is there a cost to filling that back in, or how does that happen? Or are we pretty confident that
Yeah.
it's going to work on this site?
Just
I'm-
grab shovels and just.
Yeah,
Everybody.
I have no idea. So I have no idea whether or not, that the well is going to work.
It's called a work session.
No idea whether it's going to work, but, if it does work, you're going to be needing a lot more of these. So there'll be a lot more geothermal wells being dug. But I mean, let's knock on wood that it does work and that we can find federal reimbursement to help pay for this. Because if it does, you will be the only geothermal school in all of Rhode Island. A substantial high school, not like a little project. Yeah. RIDE is very keen on this. We've got 100% of their support on this. They would love to see this happen. I would love to see this happen too. Left Field's currently actually commissioning, which is the final stage of two of these projects up in Massachusetts. So our team has experience as well with them. Me personally, I don't, but I've got people on the bench that do, and they'll be brought in.
So one other item, and that I don't think you mentioned, was that our school building, so before the vote is taken, that the school building committee also took a vote regarding this.
So the process for this specific RTA, because we are using school department funds from your capital reserve fund, was for the school building committee to recommend an award to you to release the funds. The exact, how that funding mechanism transpires on the back end is a question for Ryan. I don't know if it's a balance transfer between budgets on the general ledger, how that works out, but yes, that was the process. SBC reviewed it, then came to you guys. For generally, the process would, for other RTAs on this project, it would go to the town. Town would be the approval. Unless a different process gets worked out.
I'll make a motion to approve the bid award on the recommendation of Left Field and Gilbane to Allied Drilling LLC. Do I have to give the amount, Andrew? Do I have to give the amount in the motion? As discussed by, Left Field's representative. Is that all right?
Sounds great.
I'll second that motion. I seconded the motion.
Favor?
Aye.
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 That concludes my presentations.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Just also, can we get both of those presentations, so that, and quite frankly, going forward, whenever we do a presentation, if we can get those ahead of time, so that we can just make sure that everybody can see what we're talking about in the community. So if we can get those, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna make a motion to allow the superintendent to sign the contracts as indicated on behalf of the school committee.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That motion. Thank you. So now we'll move back to the top of the agenda. We'll start with a discussion and the action, a motion to seal the minutes of the executive session, which happened on May 22nd, 2024.
I'll make a motion to seal the minutes of the executive session from May 22nd, 2024.
All in favor? No, I'm sorry. We need a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, there was no votes taken in that executive session on May 22nd, 2024. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is transportation. We'll have Director Mahoney come up.
Thank you, everybody. I'll make it really quick. Everything went perfect. Bye. No, okay. See, I got everybody back alive. Here we go. We're good. We're good. Okay, I want to start off the presentation. As some of you might know, on September 6th, the school department sent out a notice to families that we had an early morning bus delay. We sent that out across the board through robocall and through email. Unfortunately, this delay was due to the passing of an Ocean State Transit driver, Carol Sandrelli. She had passed away the night before, on Thursday night. An abundance of caution for our drivers' emotional states and to give Ocean State the time in the morning to combine her route that she was ready to drive for the high school and middle school. They ended up having combined some buses to grab her students for the AM, for high school, middle, and for her West Kingston route in the afternoon. So to give them some extra time in the morning, we sent out the robocall to parents just to let them know we might be partially delayed. So I'd like to tell you a little more about Bus 13 Carol. And before I'm going to read you just part of her obituary, but today I was able to speak with Holly at Ocean State, and she said she had been in constant contact with Carol's husband and daughter, and her daughter had posted on Facebook, her mother's passing, and just how much she loved her and how much the family misses her already. And it was great to hear that Holly had gone through all the comments and was reading it, and there was over 150 comments of people over the years. Carol was a bus driver for Ocean State for 40 years. Every year we've had them as a contractor. She drove Bus 13 for South Kingstown. So to have over 150 people in the community just on one Facebook post reaching out, sending that family love was just a really positive in such a tragic loss. And also too, in this happening, and then how it affects in our buildings is we actually have a staff member at Broad Rock whose wife, and he said 1991, Carol was the driver of his wife in 91. Now he's a member here and he has students in the district who didn't drive with Carol, but they've known her obviously their whole life. So I'm going to read from her obituary real quick. Carol Sandrelli, 71, passed away unexpectedly on Thursday, September 5th, surrounded by her husband and children. Born in Wakefield to the late Charles and Hazel Stone Chinkabranu, and the youngest of 5 children, the baby, she lived in Wakefield all of her life and attended South Kingstown High School. Carol married her husband, William Sandrelli, in 1971, and they would have celebrated their 53rd wedding anniversary this year. She was an avid reader and loved spending time with her family. She also found great joy in driving the bus for South Kingstown, which she did for 40 years. She swore that she would drive the bus until the end, and as usual, she was true to her word. So I just want to highlight Carol and her family and just put it out there that the visitation for the funeral will be at Avery Storty on Thursday night from 4 to 6 p.m. And we did send a message to the families of that bus on the bus routes that use Bus 13, just to let them know that if they want to send any cards or any greetings, they could send it right to Ocean State Transit, and they make sure the family received any cards or any well wishes that they'd like to send to the family to give them time to grieve on their own. So I want to thank Carol for her service in all these years, and we're gonna make sure we do something, send over to the bus company going forward, and to thank her family and again lifelong residents of the town. So I hate to report that. I'll move on to the transportation, but I just want to let you all know kind of that happened to one of our own in town and a graduate of South Kingstown High School. Okay, now on to the transportation part. Even though I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm gonna do true Mahoney fashion. I'm gonna start off with an apology. I'd like to apologize to the families, the staff, and then school committee. I have to do better. Transportation has to do better, and Ocean State has to do better in all of this. So I'm going to give you the report going forward of the transportation timeline, where we are now, current staffing, and the improvements that we see that can be made. So in early August, the South Kingstown School Department did a data pull of all the opted-in students in our Skyward system. That data was sent to Ocean State Transit to plug into their routing software, VersaTrans. And I'm going to try to not be like Chris and, make everything small words. I'll try to give you the full words as we go along. I won't do transportation lingo. About 2 weeks before school started, there was an error found with the data where a lot of the grades hadn't rolled over. So we went through a validation process with myself and Ocean State Transit, and with the help of Kim Thibodeau and Eric Londrigan on the school side, we worked to give Ocean State corrected data, corrected sheets of who was in for kindergarten grade level, who was in for Broad Rock versus elementary, and kind of clean up all the data on our end. Ocean State had worked on these routes, fixing the stops and locations and creating our special education routes. At this point in the data, one of the big errors they ran into was their VersaTrans software on a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks before school started. Holly, the manager over there, about 8 hours or 6 to 8 hours of her work got deleted at the end of the day. It's a web-based server program. So they tried to recover the data and they couldn't. Again, just to explain kind of as we go along, you'll see pushback, how we got to where we got to where routes went out on the Friday before school. So as these routes were being generated, I was receiving updates from Ocean State Transit and sending them back any feedback or errors that I found, such as incorrect start times, routes that were over an hour, which were missed in the initial data process that we needed to correct to make the routes well under an hour. And some of the routes were not reflecting loading and unloading times at the sites, as they were showing school let's go at 3:13. The kids are not on the bus and off the property at 3:13. So we wanted to give parents a true accurate time so they would understand that their students, it takes about 5 to 7 minutes to load the buses. So we really wanted to try this year to reflect true time so parents could plan doctor's appointments after school activities. So we really wanted to get it right. This led us to, with these errors, finding incorrect start times, them sending me different route sets, going through them, over the phone and in person. This led us to the week before school started, where I had presented to you on your last school committee or that school committee meeting, where we were. And at that point, I thought we were in a good place and that we would have the next morning the routes out. That was the Wednesday. But unfortunately, there occurred more additions, subtractions, changes with redoing these routes over and over again with this VersaTrans program. Data in, data out, and there was more errors coming out along the process. Every time I was getting a new set of routes, missing safety stops that we had put in at the beginning and now disappeared. Missing K students that were double checked on my end, double checked on their end, their stops were missed. And again, we give K stops home stop. So, day one, we didn't want to send out routes to parents that had missing stops for their incoming K students. So once all these issues were cleared up and we thought we had a good final set of routes, that's how we got to Friday. From Tuesday presenting to you that Wednesday morning they'd be done, Wednesday, Thursday, till Friday at about 5 p.m. we finally got the routes from Ocean State Transit, the finalized versions. And with the help of Eric Londrigan, they went out to all families. At that time, we also sent out all the special education routes, all the big bus routes went out via email to all families. And then all the special education routes went out to individual families, individual emails to show them when and what bus their student would be on, including Prout, Monsignor Clark, and our transition adult learner program. So after the main routes went out on Friday night, we found more errors with the programming with parents' input. Routes were created for wrong driveways. This is one of the largest errors we found in their programming is if the address is 25 High Street and their programming doesn't see 25 High Street as a valid driveway, it'll grab 30 High Street, which might not sound very far away, but in some of these roads, it ends up being a safety hazard. It ends up being 5 houses away, not 1 house away. So that was one of the major issues we had when the data did get out to parents. We also ran into issues on Ocean State's end where there was student data of students that were no longer in South Kingstown that was in their old system, was not bypassed by the new data dump we had given them and had made its way in, which again, we then manually went through, deleted students we knew were no longer in SK. Some other issues we had was that our information comes right out Skyward, home addresses. Some families have multiple homes they might need busing to, daycare services, grandparents, family members, caregivers. So that was not included in our initial data. And we did not have a way to have that in our initial data. Another major problem we ran into that was not realized till after parents got this was anyone who lived in an apartment number, a complex number, had any kind of differentiator in the numbering of their house, pretty much broke Versatrans. It turned, the example I wrote here was 123A South Road, turned into A 123 South Road, and actually deprogrammed that student from our bus route. So we were missing kids in all kinds of areas of the town that didn't get routed due to the Versatrans program. This also came into effect with the Prout Monsignor Clark routes with Versatrans programming their routes wrong and some data entry issues that went along with that. So that's what got us to where we are now. Before I go on to where we are now, does anyone have any questions about before the routes went out?
Is this a new program that Ocean State had? I mean,
No, it's a very old, and that's one of the issues, and that's what we're working through now is, and in the moving forward is moving away from Versatrans.
because it sounds like a software issue in a lot of ways.
Huge, and that's what we've been dealing with since I started. This is my third cycle doing transportation. Versatrans has always been an issue.
Mhm.
And speaking with our new special ed director in her former district, they had Skyward and they had Versatrans, and we were speaking this week, they had to do a manual data dump where they were looking at every individual student. They didn't have same issues we have with the number of buses, but they had to go through manual because,
So does,
but Versatrans, yes, is an old program that has
does
caused issues.
Ocean State take ownership of this and have they agreed to look at new software?
Yes, and they do have another product available for going forward. Right now we are currently in the middle of fixing the errors and all that, but they do have another Google-based program that they use in some of their yards.
And I really appreciate the explanation. It's super helpful to know how we got here. But it's heartbreaking for these families who don't know when their bus is coming Tuesday morning on the first day of school.
Completely agree.
And so, like you said, we all need to do better.
Mhm.
And I think somehow we owe all of these children and their parents an apology from us and Ocean State combined, because however it happened, it's really shameful. And I know you did everything you could. I can see how heartfelt you are that these problems happen. But I just think that before we do this again, we've got to shore up the software issues.
And I do expect that from Ocean State to be very transparent, is that something coming from them public facing to give to the school department to share with everyone. Is there any other questions on for the first day of school, essentially? Nope.
I mean, I was just curious if the other districts have these same issues. Is it unique to South Kingstown with this Versatrans system? Because you stated there's at least one other district that uses
The
Versatrans.
Skyward, the
Ocean State,
specific
it's gotta
Skyward,
work.
yeah, the specific Skyward.
Yeah.
Also, our opt-in process is fairly new. We're at year 2 of opt-in. So in that sense, it was almost a perfect storm of 2 weeks before school. Yes, some of our data didn't roll over properly, but the actual Versatrans and Skyward speaking together, we've been dealing with for 2 years. They've had their tech department on it. We've confirmed it's not our side. It's their technology of the Versatrans. Again, being an older system, it should be a simple upload, but for some reason it does not upload properly. Whereas some districts who don't use Skyward and Versatrans combined can have a daily upload. So if a new student came in on a Monday, the bus company would know on Monday that student's there and could start routing them as soon as they could get a bus ready. And it would be no one in theory involved. It would go through a register to get the student in the system, right to the bus company, routed, parents contacted.
So that's a handoff between the issue is a handoff between Skyward and Versatrans. Versatrans will work with other systems that school districts
Yes.
use to track their students.
Yes,
Okay,
but overall replacing Versatrans, in my opinion, on this side of it is the best way to go and use their Google product in the next cycle of routing, which is a new program to their company that I believe started using this past year.
yeah, can they give us any guarantees that there won't be issues going forward like this?
I expect that from them, and I expect I am going to ask them to present in the future too, again with an acknowledgement of what happened, and then to come to the transportation subcommittee and to come in front of you guys as what the next steps are and room for improvement, what went wrong, what can go right, what's the future look like.
Yeah, is there any room to do like a test, like a test run where you have the student data go in and,
Yeah.
and come spit back out and then
Definitely.
see-
And now
see how
we have
close
this
to
next
reality it is.
cycle. So they definitely can do a test run of the new system, implementing in Google and seeing,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I'd like to see that done. We can talk about this in our subcommittee meeting
Mm.
tomorrow as well, but I would definitely like to see that happen, end of the school year. Way before, I want a lot of lead time.
I like
is basically what I'm
December.
saying.
That's my goal. Start that in December. So
Yeah,
we're way
there you
ahead of
go.
it. And then we start messaging parents in May that, everything that can go wrong is planned for and that we're on a new system.
Potential. Say if it's a matter of a data upload, take our existing data this year, run it through the new system, and then compare it to what was created with Versatran. And you would hope that the routes that we've got in place now, with things aligned and with things working through human effort, would then be reflected in that. We can cross-reference that. So that's something basically, instead of saying, okay, well, here's our data as early as possible, run these routes and have everything be new to be established. Maybe we use this, ask them to use our current routes that are now corrected to then run that test run as if it recreating this year, and then see how similar or different they come out and evaluate that effectiveness and ask them to do that troubleshooting now. So it's not based off of fresh data and we're not doing the first iteration.
That's actually a great point and kind of what I was leaning towards. I didn't say it as eloquently as you did. So, but yeah, that was my point. Let's use data. We know what the route should look like and see what comes back out and make sure it's going to work for us.
And for my initial discussion with them, the Google-based product that the subcommittee had on is a lot of the topics we've discussed at our subcommittee for transportation. This new Google product would be a lot more intuitive rather than Versatrans. They have to print me a PDF. They send it to us. It doesn't need moving. It has less moving parts, and the Google product would allow us to have maybe live updates on routes or a lot more of things we've been looking to maybe add going forward.
I have a question. I just have two statements. One, I appreciate your sincere apology to the community, to us, to everywhere where you take responsibility for what you're doing, even if it doesn't lay at your feet fully. But I also heard you say, maybe I do have a question. I also heard you say you had some room for improvement that you wanted to discuss, and maybe it will include everything that the suggestions that we're all throwing at you. Maybe you have some suggestions of your own.
Definitely. So I'm gonna go to where we're at now. I'll start with the good. Let's get you guys get back into the good mode. The combined routes have been very effective so far. Working with the staff at Broad Rock, especially, we knew the high school part of the combined routes, getting on site, getting the kids delivered, getting to Broad Rock. That was our big issue. Again, with your help, we were able to move the start time back a little bit just to make sure we had that cushion in there of start time, and it's worked pretty flawlessly. First day went really well, and every day since has gotten even a little better, timing a little better, where the buses will be located. We moved our mini buses around a little bit, but even working with our local police, they were happily shocked how well it worked. There was no backups on a Broad Rock Road like we had last year when we initially moved. First week was it was a learning curve last year with changing the parking lot structure, but this year, no backups, and it's run overall pretty smooth. And also I'm happy to report, unlike years past, as of now, we have and Ryan will be very happy to hear this. We have no intentions of adding any buses. The mini buses are at a good capacity. The large buses are at a good capacity. We're not over capacity. We are not missing any students, even with all the corrections we had to add. At this time, we will not be adding any buses from what was been previously presented. So also where we are now, there is currently still work to be done. There's parents I'm emailing back and forth with, Ocean State's emailing back and forth with, and calling daily. We are working on that with Ocean State, but all parents have been emailed, called, or Ocean State is working on their routes right now. And again, there has been issues, and I will let Ocean State speak to that, with some parents should have got a quicker response. But on my end and Ocean State's end, I can attest to they've been working a lot of hours too to try to fix the numerous amount of errors that were done on the final routes. I will say we put safety first. So when we do get a safety concern first stop, that one goes right to the top of the list, and we get that right to Ocean State. I follow up with a phone call of an on-site safety review to change a stop. Sometimes the stop will be set for 4 houses away again, and it's on a blind curve. It's on heavy traffic road. It's many issues, but we've made sure that all those safety stops have been fixed and corrected for the families. Also, one of the things I've asked of Ocean State so far is that the bus depot have someone at the phone, because currently they are short staffed, and I will get into that, but just communication. We need to work better on communication. My office is trying to do the best communication, but we need to be there for parents when they call and they're nervous. Even if the bus is 5-10 minutes late, they need someone to talk to, just to say, yep, we can confirm, call the driver, your student is safe, they'll be home in 10 minutes. So that's one of the initial asks I've had of Ocean State Transit. The next step, current staffing. As of mid-August, Ocean State Transit was at full staffing. I went to their training session. It was a great training, and they had no issues with drivers or monitors. Everyone was up, ready to go. By the first day of school, unfortunately, Ocean State was down 5 monitors and 3 drivers. This was due to injury. They had one person they had hired, trained, all that, and then didn't show up to work the first day. They unfortunately had someone who had a major family event and had to take a leave for this year of school. And we also did lose some staff to another bus company who currently is very short staffed, and they took our drivers, not inside of Ocean State, but a separate company who right before school started took 2 of our drivers, or 1 driver, 1 monitor, I should say. I just want to give a quick shout out, and I'm sorry to make this extra long, but Anna in my office, she's my halftime secretary. She's there every morning fielding the calls. Again, with our department having kind of a few hats, she's done a great job. So I just want to give her a little shout out. So the next step is the improvements. So I've already been working with Eric Londrigan and Kim Thibodeau in our administration on revamping our systems, looking at the opt-in, opt-out, better documentation, and better system for the opt-in, opt-out. Again, capturing the daycare data, capturing specialized data for a student, capturing anything we didn't get this time around and doing it right. So our opt-in, opt-out works properly. We're being efficient, but we're also getting all the data rather than bits and pieces having it manually changed afterwards. The goal is to have the least amount of manual changes afterwards so that day one, we have the best routes up possible. Also, I have been working with our special ed director, who's brand new, and she's doing a fantastic job. I almost said fantabulous. That's the Narragansett education, not South Kingstown. Gonna say it again. Work on going forward with our planning. And again, we've had a lot of turnover there. So this summer was a little challenging on that end, but she's been great. And even looking at next year of how we're going to plan special ed routes. Let's kind of wrap this part up. So we want to get away from the old way we used to do things. We were over programming the buses. There was buses passing each other. But I think we made a good strides in combining the routes. But the next step is cleaning up all the data process, and obviously Ocean State has some work to do on their end and what they're providing for us. And then just to give a shout out and a reminder, Transportation Subcommittee tomorrow night, South Kingstown Admin Building, 5 to 6:30 p.m. So that's what I have for our in-house busing. and then I have an update on statewide. Does anyone have any questions about our in-district busing?
I just want to say thank you. You know, it's a really hard job and all you hear is complaints because you never hear when people are happy. So, I just want to say thank you for all the work you and your team are doing. Because it's difficult. You'll get past this, you know, by October, you'll be, you know, all of these kinks will be worked out. But when you're in the middle of it, I know how hard it is. So I really, really appreciate all the work that you and your team is doing.
Thank you. And I will say, as much as I joked last time I was here, please don't show up to my house. There's been a lot of great people in town, a lot of people who've worked with us and understood there was delays and understood that the communication trail sometimes takes longer than it should between myself and Ocean State and getting back to them. But I will say I'm very proud to live in this town and be part of the town with, you know, and people have the right, you know, they're taxpayers also, but I've had a lot of great people and a lot of kind emails. So I'll move on to statewide busing. Just to give you a quick update. Statewide busing provides all of our CTE, McKinney-Vento, and other routes outside of the district. And as the news has recently reported, they are down a significant amount of drivers, and we actually lost a driver and a monitor to the provider that is working with statewide, which has put now us in a hole locally. This has impacted us where we have a couple students who've been impacted by not getting proper timing on their statewide buses coming from other towns and coming to South Kingstown. So we've been working with our superintendent, the principal of the schools where this happens, to find alternative means of transportation. Because unfortunately, statewide has not been able to provide consistent routes home for the kids in a timely manner. We've been getting notifications later on in the day that a bus is not currently available. Eventually in the night, there will be one available, but we cannot tell you what time a bus will arrive on site. So some of the alternatives we've reached out to, our Ocean State Transit has offered to help after they do their PM runs. They've actively been asking each time this has happened in the past 2 weeks. If there's a driver available, and they were able to help us the other night. Last minute, a family member came to pick up the student, but they were ready to have a bus there. So that was one of our alternatives. And we've also been reaching out to other districts to look into ride sharing and paying the other district, which would be similar rate to statewide. So I just want to give you guys that update that it's the whole state is currently going through this, but we are trying to keep the kids safe as best we can and get them home and not going to the northern part of the state at 7 o'clock at night or something crazy like that. We want to get them home so they can be with their families and then come back the next day. That's it. Anyone have any questions? No, nothing else. Nothing else.
Thank you, Mr. Mahoney.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now agenda is the subcommittee organization. And so having these subcommittee organization on our agenda so quickly after school starting is so that we could start to have these subcommittees taking into consideration that yes, we do know after the election time in November, some of this stuff, some of these committees may shift around a little bit. However, we should not be putting them on hold until after the election. In our packets, we had a chart that Terry has put together for us, and it's actually pretty well put together. However, looking in some areas, we do need members. So there needs to be a notice that goes out to the community. And as I'm speaking, the community for those community members that are listening in, we are looking for members on the wellness, policy and planning, education and accountability, maybe.
So Paula, before we get into that, I'm curious if we, as part of this conversation or is it something that, we collectively kind of toss around and think about? Are there any of these that can be retired? Are there any of, and so that we can, when we call out to the community, so I just want to make sure that all of them are needed and then go from there as far as who's sitting on what, I guess. Or do we see that these all as 100% necessary and we want to put out? Because a budget and finance also needs we need community members, a high school teacher and an elementary school teacher. Or someone from those levels, right? Same with policy and planning and education and accountability that had been on hold at one point, I think. So I guess a more robust conversation about which committees are needed and then which committees take priority, I think.
I also think that we should, in accordance with our bylaws or with best practices of school committees, I can't remember I didn't do that research, sorry. That we should distinguish between our standing subcommittees, the ones that are going to exist always, and our ad hoc subcommittees, the ones that exist for a specific purpose. At the last page of this printout, we have, 3 subcommittees that are no longer active, but they're no longer needed. So those would have been ad hoc subcommittees, and we can just eliminate those. And then we can, after the upcoming election, we probably should have a bylaws revision again. And we can incorporate those standing subcommittees into our bylaws, and we don't need to incorporate the ad hoc ones into the bylaws.
Thoughts or Ms. Boyd?
I just like to suggest as well, I appreciate that we're doing this early. I know the committee that I work with, excuse me, policy and planning will be shifting leadership. So I'm wondering how you'd like us to present updates. We also on policy have a 9-member committee with one as a community member that is not indicated, and we are seeking that position. 4, 5, and 6 listed on the sheet are sort of held positions, a little bit unique on that committee currently, unless this group changes that. So my question is, how would you like us to share anything that we see immediately that would like to be changed on this going forward?
more conversation. Are both of those really necessary? Also, the Education and Accountability Committee, which I chaired, originally it was supposed to be phase one with the consolidation of the middle schools, and the second was a phase two, looking at long-term changes at Broad Rock School, meaning part of the construction project was going to be at Broad Rock School. That's no longer on the table. So we don't have a phase two. We did get some a grant and you know Mike the great effort to the administrators at Broad Rock that got the new furniture and have done a lot of work on the consolidation, but there really isn't a phase two. So I don't really think that needs to be a committee anymore. So I think we need a deeper dive, a more robust conversation. And I think, like Melissa said, this is good to start early. But I don't know if tonight's the time to have that. That's all I want to say. But we do have a lot of work to do. So I do appreciate the early start.
Just to clarify, CLAC is not a subcommittee. CLAC is a liaison position. I believe that's required by state law, that the CLAC committee is a parent committee, and the school committee sends a representative there to act as a liaison between the school committee and the local CLAC group. Am I correct? Okay, so I think CLAC has to remain as it is. And we just, as a body, need to decide if we need a separate special education subcommittee.
Correct. That's thank you for clarifying, because we found a lot of the same people were on both committees as parents. And the special education committee was not an advocacy group like CLAC. And they are like you just stated, a group that needs to remain. But I think if we could put our efforts more, instead of, trying to have a separate subcommittee, but supporting their work, might be better outcomes for the district.
I think our special education subcommittee became a way for the parents of students in special education to communicate with us, which is really the intention of CLAC. So it's hard to distinguish between the two, and add to that the these parents are some of those with the most challenges getting to meetings or finding people to take care of their kids for them, and sort of make them feel like they have to go to two different committees. I think is a burden that on a group of parents who we very much least want to put a burden on. So I think we were struggling as a committee to distinguish ourselves from CLAC, and really what we should be doing is just listening to those parents, and that's sort of the purpose of CLAC already.
So I think what I'm hearing is that I think this is a great document to have, to know what all the members of the current school committee, like where we're landing on in different roles. But if we were going to focus strictly on the South Kingstown School Committee subcommittees, it sounds to me like, and kind of an amalgamation of everything I just heard, the Budget and Finance Committee is active and needed, and Policy Planning active and needed, Transportation active and needed, and Wellness mandated by Rhode Island general law. And so what I wonder if those are, so what is that, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. To your point, Michelle, like standing subcommittees that are active and needed and or mandated. And then the rest are that ad hoc and or separate roles, like Augusta Hazard is a role and legislative liaison is a role and the CLAC is a role. Multiple school committee members could fall into the role. School improvement teams, those are out of our realm of control. And I believe going forward, we will need the strategic planning charge. But again, it would be I would assume, well, it may be a temporary, it may be a standing. But maybe if we can at least maybe tonight decide either 4 or 5 standing committees. And then, make sure we put out to the community and possibly out in our school community. Some of them, we want some teacher representatives and building representatives for them. If we can just at least agree on 5 and focus on them and making sure that they're fully, I'll say staffed for lack of a better word. So that we have full, robust conversations. And to ensure that, again, like wellness is mandated and it's not been active and it needs to become active again. So if we can at least do that maybe this evening, and then kind of go from there. Just a thought.
So, Ms. Massaningi, I agree with you completely. I think we could probably, based on the discussion we've had here, and, don't throw things at me or toilet paper my house, but based on what I've heard here, I think the education and accountability subcommittee and the special education subcommittee could perhaps be retired, dismissed, or whatever we want to call it. I've already mentioned the fact that, the subcommittees that are indicated on this list as not active, we can get rid of them. They're, if we need them in the future, we can bring them back. But at the present moment, we don't need them. And that way we would have standing subcommittees, budget and finance, policy and planning, a transportation, wellness, and strategic planning, even though strategic planning is not currently active. We anticipate that it needs to be active in the near future. And I don't know what everybody else thinks about. We need somebody to do the Augusta Hazard scholarship. We need somebody to act as a legislative liaison, and we need you to continue on the school building. So don't be trying to duck the school building committee. And like I said, the CLAC representative is mandated. And the school improvement teams are not under our purview. They should not have school committee members on them, am I correct? Okay.
So do we have a motion to retire these 2 subcommittees that were spoken on? Or are we going to? Okay,
All right, I'm gonna make a motion to retire the 3 inactive subcommittees, DLI, redistricting, and sustainability. And also to retire education and accountability and the special education subcommittees.
Second.
Mr. Bradley, Chair.
Aye.
Mr. James Vestivo,
Aye.
Ms. Carol Better,
Aye.
Miss Melissa Boyd.
Aye.
Miss Kate Massinazzi.
Aye.
Miss Michelle Busso,
Aye.
and myself, aye. That motion passes.
So even though I didn't state it, that leaves us with our 5 subcommittees that we will make as standing subcommittees.
Do we need a motion to instate the strategic planning subcommittee? Because I think we just retired those.
I didn't, no, I retired the three at the bottom, not strategic planning.
Yeah, but
didn't-
I was wondering if we need a motion to have that committee, to form that committee.
No, the strategic planning, it already exists. It's just not active.
I'm sorry, I did not see it on the list before, but I see it now. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll make another motion to make the following subcommittees as standing subcommittees. Budget and finance, policy and planning, transportation, wellness as required by state law, and strategic planning. Those 5 subcommittees will be standing subcommittees as per our bylaws.
Second.
All in favor?
I.
Aye.
Aye.
That motion passes. Yes.
And then I think for tonight, I think that is good. And then, but we want to put out to the community that these are our 5 standing subcommittees. We would love participation, put together a formal process on how that looks and go from there so that we can get them fully functioning and up and running.
And then I would suggest when each of these subcommittees meet the next time that they, I mean, this is not really the way it's supposed to be done, but that they like give us a description of what they see as their charge. Unless we want to take it on and say the charge of the budget, fine. I think it would be better to do it coming out of the subcommittee.
Okay, that wraps up our agenda for tonight.
I'll make a motion to adjourn. Want to see Kamala?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That motion passes at